Just to maybe start out with some quick introductions. I'm Alan Percy. I'm the CMO over at TelcoBridges, and we're a maker of session border controller and media gateway technology. And I am very lucky to have this wonderful panel of participants here from all different parts and segments of the industry. And Rebekah, why don't you introduce yourself real quick?
All right. And we totally lined up as our pictures on there, and we're just so good. God, I'm like, oh, look at us. We're actually in order. So Rebekah Johnson, founder, CEO of Numeracle, founded the company about 6 years ago, focused on addressing enterprise calls being labeled as fraud or spam by the carriers. That came out in 2017. I was on the FCC's robocall strike force, making that horrible, stupid, naive decision to label calls with information when no information is ever delivered in the communication. So I thank the government and I thank the carriers for creating such a big mess that I got to start a company. So that's how I got here.
Yeah.
Very good. Thank you, Rebekah. My name is Marc Onge. I'm with TransNexus. I've 33 years, Alan, in telecom. Started my career with Bell Canada, where I learned the basics of voice switching with all the gear and the cables, and then worked with different telecom vendors. Now I'm with TransNexus. We provide a call treatment solution to deploy stir-shaken, prevent fraud on voice networks, least cost routing, robocall mitigation, and so on. My job as, say, a sales engineer is to consult our service provider customers to use the TransNexus solutions in their networks.
Very good. Great. Michael?
Hi, I'm Michael Cohen. So I'm a software engineer. I work for a company called Unified Office, and we provide intelligent phone systems for SMBs and also IoT networks for SMBs. And some of our customers are auto dealerships, doctors' offices, and we also sell the phone system for hundreds of Domino's franchisees. So yeah, we've implemented stir-shaken for our systems, and we're signing the attestations, and it's all working. But is it? That's really the question. Is it working? And we're a bit frustrated because, well, the public phone system still has, many unsigned calls out there. It's, in fact, the vast majority. So we still think there's work to be done, and we're going to do that work. We have to. So that's kind of our take on stir-shaken. We're going to do it.
Yeah.
And we have so far.
Good, thank you. So I want to point out, so I invited these three folks here. They all have very different positions within the ecosystem of securing the telephone network. My company is mostly focused on the implementation of it, along with Marc Onge's company. Rebekah's company is responsible for untangling the mess that we're creating. And poor Michael is one of the people that are suffering with it. So we'll hopefully get some different perspective on things as we go through here. So let's just talk about what's the problem. So I was at a meeting yesterday in DC and with some representatives from the FCC and the FTC and a lot of the other vendors that are part of the space. And they reminded us as part of this discussion that the reality is what they're really trying to stop is this fraud that's happening on because of or via the telephone network that's costing consumers. And this most recent statistic from the FTC says that 68 million subscribers or consumers lost $29 billion to robocallers, scam robocallers in this last year, 2022. So that's a huge issue. That's a lot of money that gets snuck off. And unfortunately, that money doesn't always just go to, yachts in the Caribbean. It ends up in a lot of times in terrorist organizations and other things like that. So it's a major problem to the American consumer. It's a major problem geopolitically, and it needs to stop. So that's partly what started the initiative to begin to put together stir-shaken. And then I just wanted to kind of quickly remind everyone what the what the goals and the objectives for STIR/SHAKEN was, and then we'll get into some of the conversation about it. But before STIR/SHAKEN, it was very easy to spoof a telephone number, to basically substitute the calling number on a telephone call. It was simple APIs, you could do that. And the calls would, when you make a call, they traverse, of course, many intermediary service providers, which makes it really, really hard to do traceback. If you go back 5, 6, 7 years ago, before STIR/SHAKEN, it was almost impossible, except in the worst cases, terrorist cases or murders and things like that, to figure out the source of a call. And this also kind of left the attorneys general with a problem of they didn't have hard data to prove that somebody was abusing the telephone network, because there wasn't the data to collect to then use in a court case to then go after somebody. So the real goal of STIR/SHAKEN was to secure this calling party information, detect any tampering, provide information about the origin of the call or where did it enter the network, and then provide some traceback, leaving some breadcrumbs in the telephone network so that they could use that data to then go back and use it in prosecutions. So we put together one little quick slide that shows how STIR/SHAKEN works in one slide. Before STIR/SHAKEN, if you made a call, went through your originating service provider and then traversed through intermediate service providers to your terminating service provider. But with STIR/SHAKEN, the idea is that the originating service provider can then attest to the origin of the call, that they either know specifically where it came from or have a general idea, like which trunk it came from, or maybe they don't know, but at least, hey, we were the first people to touch this call. It also provides security around the caller information with a passport, which has an encryption technology with it. And then the terminating service provider knows, that where the call came from, has that data about its attestation, and that the caller ID hasn't been manipulated, and can then deliver it to a subscriber as a verified status. So, in a nutshell, that's really what STIR/SHAKEN entails. There's lots more to it, of course. In the past, we've spent whole 1-hour sessions kind of doing a tutorial on it, and if you're interested in that, we've got some recorded sessions that can explain that. So then the question sort of happens is, all right, so what does STIR/SHAKEN do and it does not do? Well, as we mentioned, it secures the caller information. The originating operator can attest to the origin, can define the levels of attestation, A, B, or C, which we won't go into details, but A is the highest, saying I know specifically who the subscriber is. And C means I don't know where it came from, but at least you know it came through my network. And then also, too, you can pass that information along and tell the subscriber that the call has had attestation, but not what level, and then, of course, provide some traceback. But here's a few things it does not do, and I think this is where a lot of the misconceptions are. It does not pass the level of attestation on to the end subscriber. It does not monitor patterns of calling or abuse. It's not its job. It doesn't know the intent of the caller, which we're going to be talking about quite a bit today. It doesn't differentiate between legitimate or fraudulent behavior. It just passes it along and tells you where it came from. It doesn't do anything to reject or redirect suspicious behavior. And it doesn't terminate, fraudulent calls. It just tells the terminating service provider. So this is probably where the biggest knowledge gap probably is. I think people's expectations for STIR/SHAKEN was, it's going to solve all the world's problems. Well, unfortunately, it doesn't. It's part of a bigger piece of a puzzle. And a little bit of history on STIR/SHAKEN. I think, a little bit of background. The effort to try to squash this stuff started in 2003, and I'm not going to go through all this, but there's a couple of big milestones. One of them is that September 28th in 2021, the FCC passed an important rule, which is the may not accept rule, which allowed a service provider to then decide to start to reject traffic that is of suspicious origin. Before that, the FCC mandated that every call be delivered without regard to its origin or suspicious nature. Also, too, they got a feedback session they called the Triennial Report on STIR/SHAKEN, and then more recently mandated that STIR/SHAKEN be implemented by all service providers. And just a quick example of some of the enforcement activity. here, and I guess I'll leave this up here just for a second, but between the FCC and the FTC have been starting to, I'll call it close the noose on the illegal robocallers and starting to prosecute some of the misbehavior. And one of the key things was this last February, and this, if you want to read more about this, TransNexus has a great blog. I recommend you take a read through it. Is in February of this year, right? Just a few days away. The non-gateway intermediate providers have to support Shaken, and that's probably why some of you are here. The robocall mitigation must be managed by all providers, starting to screen those calls. And your robocall mitigation plan has to be certified, whereas before you could basically throw anything, say, well, we have a plan, and it might be perfunctory, but now that process needs to be certified. So let's move on and ask our panel a couple of questions here. Let's start with, maybe I think Rebekah, probably you wanted to talk about some of the new mandates that the FCC has issued, and maybe start with that, share some of the newer mandates.
Yeah, I think the Trace Act and the FCC are the gift that keeps on giving. It just continual. I think it just shows the exhaustion from the FCC on trying to combat robocalls. They can only issue mandates on what they have the authority and who they regulate. The problem is actually beyond their reach, outside of what they can actually, where it should be addressed to truly stop fraudulent calls. So I think one of the most latest ones is with regards to the AI robocalls. I think everyone saw the President Biden AI call that probably got the White House all up in a stink as well, with political campaigns coming up. And it's just another, I think, a desperation, act from the FCC to try to get control on top of how to get the service providers to be responsible. That's a completely different kind of topic to have with regards to where does the liability and the responsibility sit. And right now, our government is saying the service providers. You're responsible to know who is putting traffic onto the network. The FCC, rightly or wrongly, believed that STIR/SHAKEN was the solution to solve all problems. I was at the Hill having conversations, and I can tell you staffers think STIR/SHAKEN was supposed to solve all the problems, so there's confusion as to why there's still issues. Those are quite shocking, jaw-dropping conversations that you'll have. And explains a lot as to why we still don't have things solved. But really, from the SEC's perspective, this is a regular throughout the year, just this constant attempt of just throwing in the baby with the bathwater of trying to stop fraudulent calls. I don't necessarily agree that all their actions are what's going to make an impact. But right now, the next latest thing is, can't use AI for the robocalls. I don't think it's going to make any impact whatsoever on anything, to be honest with you.
Yeah, so Marc, any thoughts?
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. Alan used the term the noose is tightening, and I think it's the right term. I've been involved with STIR/SHAKEN for a few years now, and I remember at first talking with service providers who had to implement it. It was like, oh my God, what a burden. The feds are, imposing this on us. What's it going to do? They want more money because I got to register here and there. But over the years, what I've seen is the FCC tightening the noose, At first, when you had deployed STIR/SHAKEN, you no longer had to submit a robocall mitigation plan. But now you still do, So I think the FCC is adjusting, and the goal really is to stop these illegal calls. And there are more and more actions happening. You mentioned, Alan, about the non-gateway intermediate service providers having to sign calls. I think that's a great thing, and it's going to make a difference.
Yeah, Michael, so I'd love to hear from a service provider's perspective. What have you seen?
So some of the things we're looking out for on the horizon are kind of exciting, and really should have been addressed years ago in our estimation. But one of the things, and I don't know the details on it, but there are two types of phone networks: IP, that's voice over IP, and the older switched telephone systems, TDMs. And right now, StirShaken doesn't really apply. There's no mandate, there was no mandate to integrate into the TDM networks, and now they are mandating that. That's coming soon. I'm not sure when. I'm sure.
I hope.
Yes, because that's part of the problem. They left these. It's a huge sieve. I mean, there's giant gaps in here where, this stuff just doesn't apply, but still phone calls are being made. And, hopefully that will, hopefully the noose will be tightening and that stuff will be cleared up. But we feel, our company feels that one of our tenets is that the customers shouldn't have to, they should just have an intrinsically safe and secure public phone system to work with. So that's really our tenet, that the public phone system should have safety and security as a feature, and it's far from it now.
It wasn't designed with that. We're reverse engineering and going backwards and trying to apply security. I mean, all
Exactly.
communication channels are pretty much allow for anonymity, which is the root of fraud.
Right.
Wherever you can have anonymity, then you can commit fraud. And we're the fools sitting here going, okay, now let's put some identity into this network. But with the TDM, I mean, I don't know. The only answer I know is we got to move to a full IP. And a lot of rural providers have already done the hard work. It really is AT&T with a lot of TDM still there. And they told the FCC in 2012 that they were going to begin theirs. They were the leaders. They were the leaders in sunsetting TDM. 2012. And I always use this as an analysis. We had World War II begin and end for us in 3 years. Yeah. Come on, AT&T. Yeah. Like, what are you doing? So, yeah, I hear you, Michael.
We went to the moon faster.
We did.
Yeah. Matter of fact, at TelcoBridges, we've been working on embedding passport messages into ISUP messages so we can pass StirShaken over TDM to try to help that. But, that requires a lot of updates and a lot of equipment in the middle of the network. So, yeah, there was one recent announcement the FCC announced that by May 24th, providers may refuse calls from unregistered providers. I'm curious as to, for our panelists here, what does that mean to your business or to what you're seeing with your customers? So, Richard,
I'll let one of these two.
Oh, yep, Michael, you want to start with that?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
So the FCC just announced that you as a service provider may now refuse calls from unregistered other providers. So you don't have to carry traffic any longer. If it arrives at one of your trunks and you look it up and it's not from a registered provider, you can drop the call.
Great consequences, finally, I mean, we've been doing these attestations and just passing them along, and it has helped, and we've had some cases where we we're able to use those traces as evidence. It's I don't know what else to say about that, really.
Yeah.
I'd like to add, Alan, I think, all service providers are supposed to have deployed StirShaken, and it's only logical to give it some time, and at some point you give a date, and if the call is unsigned, well, drop it. Or, our technical solutions provide the ability to block a call if there's no identity header, there's no signature, or we can divert the call to a CAPTCHA gateway that checks to see if it's a robot calling. Like, if you're a human, press 1, 2. So there are technical solutions to this, and it's totally feasible to meet that deadline in May.
I'm just going to say that I feel like this is just more from the FCC with regards to they don't want to be prescriptive. You always hear them say, we don't want to be prescriptive. We want you guys to figure this out. But you have an industry saying we need help to know what we're supposed to do because you're asking us to do a lot of non-service provider activities and invest in non-service provider technology. So that's always kind of been my issue with this approach is the burden that it does place on the service providers with very little guidance, but then this big old hammer comes in and knocks you upside the head when you don't behave properly. But for some service providers, they're like, well, I didn't get the guidance. And I mean, that's why Numeracle, we just went ahead and published a KYC policy. You had state AGs, FCC, and FTC telling all the service providers, implement Know Your Customer. It's like, not fair. Like, come on, you got to give some guidance on what that actually means. So we just made it public and it's free to download. So
Yeah.
you don't have to start from a blank slate.
Yeah, we're going to get to that. I know your customers is one of the topics we're going to get to. So let's talk about the business model, right? So some of these mandates, they do cost money. It does require resources to implement some of these. You know, what happens with the business model? So maybe, Michael, I'll start with you down there. And how does this impact the business model within a service provider? Is there something you can do to make up for those costs, or how does it work?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's going to be just an ongoing part of our business, we feel. But yeah, it's definitely, this stuff does not come for free. I mean, software engineers, one of them, we're not cheap, and it takes more than one to do all of this. So some of that will be passed on to the consumer. I mean, I think it's just inevitable, not, it's not something we're planning on doing, but I'm talking about the industry as a whole. Someone's going to pay for it, right?
Yep.
And again, we feel that public phone systems should be safe and secure just as it is, yeah.
Yeah, and it specifically stated that you should not pass on this cost to the customer, right? But there is a cost for service providers. Our solutions have, it's an extra expense for the service provider. And in the few years that I've been consulting customers on deploying our solutions, I've had only one service provider say, no, that's it. I give up. I'm dropping my voice business. It's not going to be profitable enough for me. So I think, the prices that we provide for our stir-shaken solutions are, I'll say, affordable. I haven't had too many customers complain about that. But yeah, there is an additional cost. But I think also service providers see value in it. And at least the solutions we provide give them a magnifying glass into their network, into their traffic. They're able to see who's calling, where they're calling, and seeing patterns. I think there's value.
I think the activities by the FCC and the terminating carriers to try to combat fraud created also some disruption on the business or the service provider side, because when a business has an issue with their calls, it's got to be Michael. Like, they got to be calling you. Domino's franchise go, our calls are not getting through to our customers. Our calls are being labeled fraud or spam. Our calls say Pizza Hut, not Domino's. What is going on, right? Like, they're going to look to you to solve that. And I think that's natural that they would. So, from my perspective, it's about drawing out, if we're going to have to implement Stir Shaken, that's an expense. It's pure expense line. How do I pop up a revenue line for implementing Stir Shaken? I don't know if we're going to get to that, but that's the thing that gets. I'm really excited about that part.
Yeah. No,
We will get
That
there.
is the part that I strongly believe in, and then I'll get on my soapbox at that point.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we did want to, as part of this, talk about branded calling and how to improve the call answer rate, right? I mean, there's some good value in that. And sometimes we have to explain that to people, is that by implementing this, then you get to an opportunity to add value and improve the call answer rate, which is what basically every outbound contact center or any business wants, right? I mean, the school gets yelled at because parents show up to deliver their kids to school when they find out that the school was closed because of a water main break. And they called everybody, but no one answered the phone, right? That kind of problem happens. So, so there's value in it. So here's the $1,000 question. So why do we still get illegal robocalls? We've put all this money into the network. We've poured all this technology. We've encrypted all the caller ID. We've set up all this attestation. We've wrangled all the service providers and issued all these mandates. Now, I have to admit, I have not gotten someone looking to help me with my car's extended warranty in a couple of years. And we know why, because they actually caught somebody who was behind that whole ring and did prosecute them. So maybe they set precedent. but the phone does not ring anywhere near as much as it used to, but it still does ring with fraudulent calls. So I'm curious, where are these calls coming from? So Marc, I'm going to start with you because I know you're in the middle of that.
Sure, very good. Thanks, Alan. I think these calls come from abroad. There are from other countries calling into the United States with U.S. calling numbers. There are gateway providers who let these calls come in to the U.S. PSTN, and it's only recently that the FCC has mandated gateway providers and non-gateway intermediate service providers to sign unsigned calls. I think, it's they're scam robocalls. They're bad actors. They're going to keep on trying because they make money off of it. But I think deploying STIR/SHAKEN across all service providers will help mitigate that. And you mentioned my colleague Alan Donald, who writes a blog. He keeps an eye and measures the number of robocalls, and he publishes every quarter a trend, And I think the latest trend in December was that robocalls were down, like, if I remember correctly, like 16%, which is pretty good. And it's going to take time, though. So that's what I think, Alan.
Yep.
And I think it comes back to consequences, and also that, so they're not suffering any consequences if they're abroad, that they're unlikely to. But we live in a free and open society where anyone can read about what STIR/SHAKEN is and does. And so if you're a bad actor, you can read all about it to learn how to get around it.
Yep.
And so it's till we tighten up those holes, plug up those holes, it's still going to be a problem.
I view it in two areas. Number one, the bad actors have become more sophisticated, so we don't need the Rachel. Was it Rachel at Card Services? Yeah, Rachel retired. That used to be my speech. Like, we just find Rachel. This is all over. So there's more sophistication on brand impersonation because you can do a breach. I can, have a breach of bank information. Citibank, then you have the list of all the Citibank customers. There is a way to call in and get the balance of somebody. This happened to me. So I received a call. It was from Citibank. That's what it said. That's what it said. And I Googled that number. It's a Citibank number. Yeah. And they were telling me that my card was, there was fraud. Okay, what fraud? Yeah, it happened. There was Walmart.com. Oddly enough, that happened 1 month prior, legitimately. So I ran with it and I said, okay, all right, what other information? He goes, oh, well, you just need to give me your credit card number so that I can confirm it. And he got very upset with me when I said, you're not supposed to ask me for my credit card number. I'll call you back. And he says, I'm your bank. I'll prove it. And this is when he puts me on hold for like 12 seconds and does the IVR dial in to get my current balance. I have the app up and I'm like, mother effer. Yeah. It's like, he's got my balance down to the penny, trying to convince. So it's a sophistication that the bad actors are implementing. And then number two is all we did was build a secure way to deliver crap. I mean, it's literally your diagram. I was like, oh, look, it's doing that. It's just like, we can securely deliver all this information we know absolutely nothing about.
Yep.
Green check mark. That was a good job, guys.
Yeah.
So that was when I was referring to outside of telecom. We have to solve this by actually having identity on the front end. You cannot get access to deliver a brand name unless you've been verified. Then you can securely deliver it, and then the device can render it as that's actually the entity that you will be speaking to on the other end.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, is a robocall inherently bad? No. So how do we make that determination? I don't know.
The courts are still determining.
Yeah.
Depends on which court you get.
Well, that leads right into the next question I think we wanted to talk about, which is how do we increase consumer trust and who's calling? And that kind of steps into the next question, which is, what is know your customer and why is it important? So I think this would be a great place to talk about that. So what's the value? Why is this know your customer important? And then how is it used to then improve the call answer rate? So Yeah, Rebekah?
I'm going to apologize for the Know Your Customer. I'm actually the person who introduced that concept back in 2017. I did a write-up and a presentation before the carriers and the FCC and the FTC of we're missing this component of knowing who the customer is so that you could actually assign an A or a B or a C to the call. And I was just using it as an example of, hey, telecom, let's not reinvent the wheel. The financial institutions have figured this out, that we should know our customers in order to combat money laundering and terroristic activities. It really should be know your business, but literally Verizon was sitting at the table, and the very next week, Verizon was pumping out contracts telling their upstream providers that you had to know your customers. So if anybody received those contracts, I was like, I was not ready for that to go. So here we are. It's know your customer. It really should be know your business. But it really just came down to the service providers might be 1, 2, 3 removed from the actual business. That's so unfair to put that responsibility on the service provider to know that far down the chain. And who wants to tell another vendor who their customers are, right? So this became somewhat of a challenge. This is actually the space that I am focused in. It's all identity, it's business identity. And so we do help service providers get down to who is the end entity behind the call. And then we should be able to attach that information to the call using the standards. You can leverage an RCD passport and render it all the way down to the terminating device. That requires a full IP infrastructure. That requires the terminating carrier to be able to trust it. And it also requires Apple, Samsung, and Motorola to also render that information to the subscriber. But it is possible, but all of that doesn't work unless you have a strong know your customer at the onset before you put the call on the network.
That's great, Rebekah. I think Numeracle is in much better position than TransNexus to talk about know your customer. We deliver a technical solution, and when we do that, we do coach our service provider customers into, you need to know your customer, you need to vet them, you need to know who's sending calls to your network. And in our solutions, we provide a way to filter, what customers are placing which calls with which calling number. And so in our work, that's just about the extent where we go at this point in time.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and I think the whole point of knowing who's on a phone call is, we're talking about authentication, authenticate the phone calls. And then the problem goes away because if someone knows who you are, you're not going to scam them. They know who you are. Right. It's a simple concept, and really, I think plugging the gaps in STIR/SHAKEN is a step towards getting to that goal of everyone's authenticated. But it's going to take a long time. Yeah,
make the bad guys the exception. Right now, the good guys are the exception when it comes to trusting on the terminating end. Everybody just automatically assumes this is someone or something I don't know or understand. So we got to flip the model.
I don't barely answer phone calls anymore. Yeah, that's what it's come to.
Rebekah, you make me think of something. A big part of the solution is to not let the bad call on the network.
Correct.
Right? So the originating service provider has to know his customer. The STIR/SHAKEN framework is based on trust, right? So you have to trust that the originating service provider is placing this call onto the PSTN, and it's placing this call from a customer that's known and is using a calling number they're entitled to use.
Yeah. My grandfather ran switches, and it was the ladies. That literally is where we had security. Thank you to the women in telecom.
Yeah.
This would not be here without us.
Yep.
So you had, so-and-so is calling, so I'm going to take this plug, this port is going to go down into this port. Now, I don't know if it was secure because they might have been listening in, but you did trust that who you were talking to, there was no way for anyone else to get in on that line. Right. So we had security there. We had trust, but we advanced technology and we kind of forgot about that fundamental core element of communications and just dropped the whole concept on the floor as we went to other measures.
I think a big piece of it was opening the telephone network internationally at such a low rate. And as a matter of fact, yesterday, well, it was at the FCC event, the Eric Berger, who used to be he's used to be the CTO for the FCC, and he's widely regarded for saying, you know, by creating voice over IP and by making calling so affordable, we accidentally unleashed a monster, and that was the illegal robocalls. That's probably one of the problem with it. So let's move on.
The answer is not to increase the rates, though.
Yeah,
I don't,
right. Yeah,
it's just so we're clear.
No, that's absolutely true. Yep. Let's talk a little bit about the future, and then we're going to open it up to our audience here, give you a chance to ask some questions here. So what's next? So now the stir shaking thing theoretically is mostly implemented. We still got, like you said, some TDM gaps that are in the network. But what's next that'll impact providers and impact our audience here?
So I'm looking at from really always from the enterprise perspective. So just to let you know why I come from that background, I worked at West Corporation, which is now in Toronto, and I don't know, it's gone through all its changes. But my customers were like Walmart, Walgreens, Bank of America, Capital One, American Express, and leveraging communications, right, to communicate with their customers or subscribers. And so I'm always coming from the enterprise perspective. They don't care about stir shake, and they don't care about all this other mess in your robocall mitigation. They just care about, can I communicate with my customer? That's your job, is to connect me to my customer, and what's the best way to get down to that level. So correcting and fixing the fraud spam, but with stir shaken, we do have an opportunity in the standards to attach rich call data, which includes a logo, a call reason, and a name. Give that power and control over to the enterprise, and they will need a relationship with their service provider who can attach that information in real time on a per call basis for the terminating carrier to render that information. That's what I believe in. I don't believe in the whole paying another provider outside this entire network to display a name on a call that can be spoofed. Anybody can spoof it and have a name show up. By the way, that's millions of dollars that you don't get to participate in. You don't get to, but guess what? Those companies do not exist unless you are doing all the heavy hard work to put the call on the network, to actually source the customer, to keep dominoes, to keep your customers. You do all the work, but you don't get to participate in any of the true value of what identity in the network can do. So that's what Numeracle is focused on, building the solutions that empower service providers to kind of take back that added revenue line to your cost line for stir shaken. And that's the most exciting thing that's coming down. It'll be this year, this quarter.
Yes, I think so too, if I may, Michael. I think branded calling is what's next. It's going to be really important, though, to vet the enterprises who are going to put these calls onto the network. And the CTIA has told the FCC they are developing a branded calling solution leveraging stir shaken, right? Exactly like you said, including some rich call data in there. Today at TransNexus, we can include a name in the passport, in the signature, but like you said, Rebekah, there will be more. A logo, a reason, eventually. But and I think this will be great for enterprises, and I think it'll be very good for service providers, because I'm sure today you get your customers coming to you and say, my calls are being presented as spam likely, and this will be a solution to avoid that, I think, and it'll be a major thing, and I agree, it'll come this year.
I think it'll help, and but I think with any solution, there's going to be gaps, right? And and again, I want to go back to the tenet that really a public phone system should be safe and secure, just intrinsically, because one of the things that branding won't help with is, my mom was scammed. she doesn't have, she has an old phone. She has an old, it's got the push buttons on it. And so, yeah, there's still gaps even in that kind of solution, which does, help with the main problem, like you stated, is authentication. Do you know who it is?
Yeah. And I think there probably goes even to another layer too, that we haven't yet addressed is the opposite problem, which is where, a pop-up appears on your computer screen and says, you need to call Microsoft at this telephone number. And of course, when dialing that number is actually leaving the country and going to a call center over in India, and they're going to figure out a way to get you to share your desktop, and they're going to get into your bank account, and they're going to, they're going to scam you. So they're very sophisticated. So there are probably still some things that need to do. The bad guys have figured out that the elderly especially will respond to a pop-up on their screen and will call it. And my mother-in-law and my sister-in-law's husband has fallen victim to some of those things. And I was just like, how can you not know that Microsoft's not going to tell you to call them? No, whatever. Anyway, it's kind of sad state of affairs. So I want to open it up to you folks. You got any questions? Want to talk about the state of stir shaking and then maybe rich call data? So yeah, go ahead.
So I'm in the relay business. That's phone service for the deaf and hard of hearing.
Okay.
So we get an inbound call from somebody, we don't know who they are, and they place an outbound call for that person to who they want to call. I don't know what to do with that, especially an outbound call.
Yeah, so kind of repeating the question for the recording. So you work for a relay business that takes in calls from the hearing disabled or?
Yeah.
Yeah, from hearing disabled. And then you want to actually make a voice call for them. Is that the point?
It could be somebody trying to call a deaf person.
Okay, or the other direction. Okay. And the tough part is you can't trust those now, or?
Well, it's what do I need to do to be legal and not get calls blocked?
Okay, so you're having problems with blocking?
Well, not yet.
Not yet. Or you're worried about it?
Yeah.
Alan, I'll give it a shot.
Yeah, go ahead.
First thing that comes to mind, I would consider you as an intermediate service provider. You are receiving a call from somewhere, from a service provider, and you're passing it to another service provider. That incoming call should be signed, and if it's signed, you let it go through, signed as well.
But we're actually
You're starting a new call.
starting a new call, so I don't know, I mean, it seems like if I hit
Yeah.
that certificate and put it on that call, then that seems fraudulent to me.
It's a very good question.
Are you trying to maintain the original caller's caller ID in that process? Is that?
Well, the caller ID, yeah, we put that on there, that's fine. Put the caller ID on the outbound call, but the whole signed certificate part, that's kind of.
There is a provision in the RFC to put a secondary passport on, so you can attach yours to your outbound call, and then you have the originating one on there as the originating calling part. So I got the support, and your service provider has to support that. It hasn't been widely accepted because, well, it wasn't part of the mandate that came from the FCC that you needed to be able to accept. Not only your signed certificate, but the certificate that you sent.
Yep. Yeah, the forward call problem is, yep. And think about it, there's lots of use cases where calls get forwarded, right? The find me, follow me kind of application, conferencing platforms, a lot of that. And there is a provision in the stir shaken specification, but it came at a later date, so it's not widely implemented. So good question.
Alan, if I may, so I'll take back what I said. I think you are terminating the call and you're starting a new call. Your question's very interesting, though. It's not easy to answer. But I'm sure that if we sat down and we looked at the different rules, we could figure it out.
Any other questions? Yeah, in the back corner, right there. Yep.
So, you know how there's A, B, and C certifications?
Yep.
Is
Yep.
there, I mean, is there going to be any difference in, if something's C certified, will intermediate providers pass that through just as well as A certified?
Yeah, so the question is, with A, B, and C, they're actually called attestations. Yep, no, it's okay. And, again, the A attestation means that I originated the call and I know who it is, and then the origin ID and the other information in the call header is from the originating service provider as it gets passed through the network. If a call shows up at an intermediate provider and it's not signed, then they have to sign it with a C saying, well, there was no passport attached, but I'm at least telling you I was the first one to sign it. So it leaves then breadcrumbs in the network as to where the call at least initially got inserted into the North American network. And that's usually done by gateway providers. You're right that the hope was eventually to start to block calls that are not signed, but unfortunately right now so many of them are not signed that few providers would dare disable passing calls that aren't signed. It's more a matter of, at that point, it leaves a mechanism to go back and find at least where did the call get into our North American network. And then you can watch for patterns. So if one provider is constantly putting traffic on the network that is being complained about and it's coming from this one particular provider, you can start to do some investigation and find out, who are you selling your services to? We need to start to look at more closely. So I don't know, anyone else, anything to add to that, or?
I was just going to say the attestations are not actionable right now. So it is purely nothing but informative, but it would be nice if we could eventually get to where those actions can be taken based off that.
Yep, good point.
We had a question.
Yeah.
So rich call data is very promising. It could help, gain trust back. But at this point, as all the elderly are being targeted. I mean, I tell my grandmother, you don't have the contact, don't answer the phone. Just don't, zero. And it won't really matter if you have a really nice picture that pops up to build that trust back. The trust has been broken. So assuming we can get all the players, that's every mobile provider, every PSTN network, and everyone to accept this standard and to start implementing it, what is the plan to build that trust back within society?
So those conversations are happening from beginning to end, all the way down to the device manufacturer, and it has to be native to the device. We can't have consumers having to download apps. It's just not going to work. So natively rendering that. But again, it's just a transport mechanism, so we have the opportunity, a really good opportunity, to create an even better tool for fraudulent actors to leverage. Until we close it down on the front end, on the know your customer side, we really can't take full advantage of what the technology offers. I mean, it's as simple as, we get a driver's license, right? So we go in, nobody likes the DMV. It's the worst waiting process ever, and you always forget some document because you're going to have to go back home and then pull another ticket again. So there's this painful process that we go through, and we're fine with going through it because it gives us access to a job, to a bank account, to driving a car. We get all these privileges that come with an identity. And then if we get a passport, that's our international identity. Now I can actually explore the world and go into other areas. Might need a visa for some countries. So that's what we have to establish here is identity. And it's the same concept that once we have the identity, then on the terminating side, they become the TSA. All they do is just authenticate that that's a real identity. They're not there to offer an opinion. They don't want to hear what they have to say about where I'm going, why I'm going where I'm going. They don't get to make money off of where I'm going. They just authenticate that identity that it is real. So we still have time to get there, but that's when the branding information, it's really just identity being passed along. It could go both ways with the consumer as well.
I'd like to add a bit. If your grandmother's like my 93-year-old mother, right? And Mom, don't answer. If you don't recognize the number, don't answer. Hello?
Yeah.
Right? Can't resist. The other thing, though, is, and you may disagree, the branded calling, we are mostly targeting calls to mobile phones.
Correct.
You know, you agree with that? My mom doesn't have one, you know?
Yeah.
And I think if you have a mobile phone in your pocket and it can display stuff, it's going to display differently than today.
Yes.
And you'll see the difference between, you know, a branded call, which has been originated by a vetted enterprise, you know? But for the elderly, it may not have any impact unless they have a mobile phone.
Yeah. Some people still like paper newspapers, and like just you know,
All right.
you know.
So
Hey,
analog.
we are running a little long. I just want to wrap up one little thing here too. So we put together a solution brief with TransNexus. If you folks want to scan that QR code, you can download a copy of the white paper. I'll leave that up there for a second here. We'll take one more question and then we got to wrap it up. So yeah, I saw a hand in the back there.
Part of my question is we're an MSP. We're still shaping compliance for all our customers through Samsung. And recently, it's become a huge problem with mobile tickets. You call it another business, it's fine, but when they get a call from a mobile person, with a cell phone gets a call, sometimes it shows up as spam. You go back, you gotta go to freecallerIDregistry.com and do all that, then you gotta go to Verizon and go there's
Yeah.
And then once you do that, it does fix the problem, but what are they doing differently than the wait ticket?
Yeah, so just summarize the question for the recording. So what to do about redress for mobile operators, right? You know, you're getting flagged as fraudulent or spam possibly, and then how do you redress that? So, I don't, Rebekah, you want to take a stab at that? Or?
I mean, it might solve it for a moment. The free caller registry, anything that's free has no guarantees. You're also freely giving your identity with a number to somebody to do whatever they freely choose. Be very careful with free. Very, very careful. But that's ultimately to remove the fraud and spam, even if it's on a cell. One of my enterprise reps, her cell phone was being labeled spam when she was trying to call back customers. You have to push that information down to the analytics provider that's making the decisioning. It's really not the carrier. The carrier is throwing it over to whoever they have a contract with at the time. And you have to maintain that because that information falls off. There's, again, it's free. That means no guarantee. They really don't give a rip about you. When you pay, they give a rip.
Yeah.
Like Verizon has its own, you can go.
Right.
Go out.
Right.
It seemed to work, but like you said, 2 months go by and
And then it's back. Yeah, there's no, it's the algorithm's going to pick it up and it's going to behave differently. So it's whack-a-mole from that perspective. What we do at Numeracle, I actually created that process, the remediation concept, fighting for businesses with the carriers to like, you've got to fix this. And so Numeracle has a relationship with each, and we sometimes do certain like debt collectors. There are some carriers that go, I really don't care. I don't care, I'm going to label you spam anyway. So at least you can be informed that the voice channel is not a good use channel for you anymore as a business. Lead gens, they're in the bucket too.
Good. Yeah,
Alan, I'd
one
like-
last quick thing?
Yeah, I'd like to add very quickly. You asked, what are they doing differently from voice over IP providers? Well, Rebekah mentioned that 3 large wireless carriers are using Hiya, First Orion, TNS, am I right?
Yes.
To analyze their network. They have analytics and they keep statistics on calling numbers. How many calls do they place per hour? If it's around 20 or more, that's kind of too much, right? For a specific calling number, what's the average call duration? If it's short, it's people going, hello, crap, right? And they hang up. How many of the calls from a specific calling number go directly to voicemail? And they look at other statistics like that as well. And it's this software, analytic software in these large wireless provider networks who are saying, display this as spam likely, or maybe even send it directly to voicemail.
It's the only AI on the market where they refuse to start with intelligence, which would be identity. It's quite fascinating.
Oh, good.
And
Yeah,
just a little thing.
yeah.
As an MSP, you can try something, right? You can call that from the calling number with which you're having a problem. You can call a mobile service provider, leave the call off hook for like 5 minutes or more. maybe reset the counters of the analytics.
Yeah.
It works.
Game the analytics. So anyway, hey, listen, I want to thank our panel here. Let's give them a quick round of applause for coming here today.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I want to thank you, our attendees. It was really great having you here today. And like I said, we recorded this. We'll be able to find it on the TelcoBridges YouTube channel probably next week. So thanks. Thanks so much for coming.